Hey y'all, it's Friday, December 4th, and today we're talking about solving proportion word problems. So proportions can be used to solve word problems in which there is a constant rate. However, it is very important to stay consistent when setting up your proportions. The units must match on each side of the equal sign. Which of the following equations is a valid proportion? So let's look at this first one here. Notice how on one side of the equal sign, we have miles on top and hours on the bottom. On the other side of the equal sign, miles is on the bottom, but hours is on top. This right here is not good. It's not consistent. We need our units to be the same on both sides of the equal sign. So let's look at this example. Notice this time, miles is on top on one side and on the other side, and hours is on bottom on both. This is a really great setup for a proportion word problem. That's how you're going to get to the correct answer. Okay, so a helpful hint is to set up a key when writing your proportions to make sure that the units stay consistent. So number one, the ratio of hot dogs to hamburgers sold at a baseball stadium is 8-3. So we're going to use that information. And notice it said hot dogs to hamburgers. So my key is going to be hot dogs to hamburgers. Okay? So the ratio of hot dogs to hamburgers is 8-3. If there were 272 hot dogs sold, how many hamburgers were sold? Well, let's start with 8-3 and set that equal to something else. Now we know 272 hot dogs were sold. So does hot dogs go on top or bottom? Well, according to our key, it goes on top. So 272 over X. We don't know how many hamburgers were sold. So now I'm ready to cross multiply to find my answer. So we first multiply 8 times X together, and we get 8X, and then we have to multiply 3 times 272. I don't know that off the top of my head, so I'm going to show my work over here. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 7 is 21. 3 times 2 is 6 plus 2 is 8. So I get 816. Now to get that X by itself, I divide by 8 on both sides. And I get X equals. Now, I don't know this off the top of my head, but I can figure this out. I know that 8 goes into 800 100 times. I also know that 8 times 2 is 16. So I know that X must be 102. 102 what? 102 hamburgers. So don't forget to write your units or to answer your question. So 102 hamburgers is what answers my question today. Okay, let's look at number 3. Malaya bought 32 pieces of candy for $16. The next day, she returns to buy more candy with $4. How many pieces can she buy? Okay, so we know that she bought 32 pieces and spent $16. So I'm going to represent that as the number of pieces over the money spent. Okay, so she buys 32 pieces and spends $16. Now I need to set that equal to another ratio. And the only thing I know is that she spent $4. So I don't know the number of pieces of candy she bought. So $4 goes on the bottom, and we're trying to figure out this value here. So now I've got my proportion set up. I'm ready to solve. So let's start by multiplying 32 times 4. 32 times 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 3 is 12. So that's 128. And that's equal to 16x. To get that x by itself, I'm going to divide by 16 on both sides. And I'm not sure this off the top of my head, so 16 goes into 128. Well, 16 is too big to go into 12, so I have to consider it going into 128. And I know that 6 times 8 is 48, so I'm going to start with 8. 6 times 8 is 48, so I put down my 8, carry my 4. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 4 is 12. So 128, I get no remainder. So I know that 8 equals X. So how many pieces of candy can she buy? 8 pieces. Okay, number 5. Dave is moving to a new house 5 kilometers away from his old house. If 1 mile is approximately 1.6 kilometers, how many miles are between the two houses? Okay, so this time we're comparing miles to kilometers. And it tells us that 1 mile is approximately 1.6 kilometers. So I'm going to set my key up to be miles compared to kilometers. So miles will go on top. So I know my first ratio is 1 to 1.6. And we're going to set that equal to something. Now we know that the new house is 5 kilometers away. So where does the kilometers go? Well, it goes on the bottom. And so I'm trying to figure out how many miles away the new house is, right? So now I'm ready to cross multiply. 1 times 5 is 5. And then 1.6 times x is 1.6x. So now to get that x by itself, I divide by 1.6 on both sides. So x equals. Now, division with decimals. I know I want to make that a whole number, so I'm going to move that decimal point one place value over. But if I do that there, I have to do that up here as well. So I'm really going to divide 50 by 16. So how many times does 16 go into 50? Well, 16 goes into 50 3 times. 3 times 16 is 48. When I subtract, I get 2. And I'm going to bring down another 0. Don't forget to put a decimal in your quotient line. How many times does 16 go into 20? Well, 16 goes into 20 one time, and I get 16. I've got 4, and I'm going to add another 0 and bring it down. How many times does 16 go into 40? 16 goes into 40 2 times, which is 32. Okay, so I'm still going to have a remainder, and that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and round to just 1 decimal place. So 1 decimal place would cut it off right there. Because that second decimal place is a 2, I'm not going to round up. I'm going to leave it at 3.1. So x is about, I'm going to change that to about 3.1 miles. Okay, moving on to number 7. If 14 children made 84 bracelets, how many children would it take to make 192 bracelets? Okay, so we were given a ratio, the number of children and the number of bracelets that they made. So my key is going to be children to bracelets. So 14 children made 84 bracelets. And I'm going to set that equal to another ratio. And I want to know how many children it would take to make 192 bracelets. So remember, bracelets goes on the bottom. So now I'm ready to multiply. So 14 times 192. I don't know that off the top of my head. So 192 times 14. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 9 is 36. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 3 is 7. Now I place a 0. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 9 is 9. And 1 times 1 is 1. So I get 8, 8. 9 plus 7 is 16. And 2. So we get 2,688 equals 84 times x. Now to get that x by itself, I need to divide by 84 on both sides. So I don't know this division off the top of my head either, so I'm going to show my work over here. 84 goes into 2,688. 84 doesn't go into 2, 84 doesn't go into 26, but it will go into 268. And 84 goes into 268. I'm going to guess 3 times, because 3 times 80 would be 240. So 3 times 4 is 12. 3 times 8 is 24. Plus 1 is 25. So now when I subtract, 8 minus 2 is 6. 6 minus 5 is 1. And I'm going to bring down this 8. Now, how many times does 84 go into 168? Well, 2 times. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 8 is 16. So, 32 equals X. 32 what? 32 children. Don't forget to answer your question. Okay? Number 9. Jason spends 18 hours over 3 weeks practicing karate. How many hours does he practice in 7 weeks? Okay, so we know 18 hours in 3 weeks. Okay, so I'm going to write my key hours to weeks. So he spends 18 hours in 3 weeks. I want to know how many hours he spends in 7 weeks. So remember, weeks goes on the bottom. I'm trying to figure out the number of hours. So I'm going to cross multiply. 18 times 7. Well, 18 times 7. 7 times 8 is 56. 7 times 1 is 7. Plus 5 is 12. So 126 equals 3 times x, which is 3x. To get that x by itself, let's divide by 3 on both sides. And 3 goes into 12 4 times. And 3 goes into 6 2 times. So 42 equals x. Well, 42 what? 42 hours. Okay, number 11. Nick walked 3/4 of a mile in 12 minutes. How long would it take him to walk 3 miles at this pace? So this one's a little tricky. So I'm going to set my ratio to distance over time. So how far he walked, the distance over the time it took him to walk that far. Okay? And I know that he walked 3/4 of a mile in 12 minutes. So that's my first ratio. So 3/4 over 12. And I'd set that equal to something. Now I want to know how long it would take him to walk 3 miles. So I know that the distance goes on top, and then the value that I'm trying to find is going to go below that, the time it takes him to walk that far. Okay, so now we can cross multiply. Well, 3/4 times x is simply 3/4 x equals 12 times 3 is 36. Now, to solve this, I actually want to multiply times the reciprocal, times 4 over 3. That means that will all cancel out and x will be by itself. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to multiply this times 4 over 3. Well, think of that as 36 over 1. So does anything reduce? Well, yeah. 3 and 36 have a common factor of 3. So that's going to change to 1, and that's going to change to 12. So 12 times 4 is 48. 48 what? 48 minutes. It's going to take him 48 minutes to walk 3 miles. Okay, number 13. The Phillips family is slowly filling their pool. It takes 2 hours for 60 gallons of water to be pumped into the pool. How many gallons would be pumped after 3 days? Okay, so it takes 2 hours for 60 gallons. So I'm going to write my ratio as time to gallons, or hours to gallons. So 2 hours to 60 gallons. Okay? Now, this is where this gets tricky. How many gallons would be pumped in after 3 days? we're trying to figure out the number of gallons. So gallons goes on the bottom. That's going to be my X. And we know it's after 3 days. Well, days is different from hours. So I'm going to have to change that to hours. And 1 day is 24 hours. So 24 times 3, 4 times 3 is 12. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So 3 days is 72 hours. So now that we have that set up, we are ready to cross multiply. So 2 times x is simply 2x. And I'm going to come write this over here. And 60 times 72. I don't know that off the top of my head. So 72 times 60. If I multiply with this 0 right here, I'm just going to get a row of zeros. So I'm not even going to bother, but I am going to place a 0 before I start multiplying with the 6. 6 times 2 is 12. 6 times 7 is 42, plus 1 is 43. So I get 4,320. Okay, so now I'm ready to get that x by itself. So I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides. So x equals, now let's show my work for this over here. 2 goes into 4,320. 2 goes into 4 2 times, which is 4. And I'm going to bring down this 3. 2 goes into 3 1 time, which is 2. I subtract and I get 1, and I bring down this 2. 2 goes into 12 6 times, which is 12. And I'm going to place a 0 above that 0. So I get 2,160 gallons. Okay, last one, number 15. The ratio of green to yellow candies is 2 to 5. If there are 32 green candies, how many yellow candies are there altogether? Sorry, I was getting kind of tongue-tied. Okay, so let's start with what we know. Green to yellow candies is 2 to 5. So I'm going to do green to yellow. Okay, so 2 to 5. And I need to set that equal to something. Now, we know that there are 32 green candies. Well, because they're green, we know that needs to go on top. But we don't know how many yellow candies there are. So I'm going to have to cross multiply. 2 times x is 2x. And then 5 times 32. I know that 5 times 30 would be 150. And 5 times 2 is 10. So that would be 160 when I add them together. Okay? So now, to get that x by itself, I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides. And x equals 80. So there are 80 what? 80 yellow candies. So this is important information, but it's not my answer, because the question asks how many green and yellow candies are there all together. Okay, so I actually need to take 80 and add to it 32, because it's asking how many green and yellow there are together. So 80 yellow plus 32 green equals the total number of candies. So 0 plus 2 is 2, 8 plus 3 is 11, so I get 112 candies total.